Chapter 5, Section 2. So, the fourth river civilization we're going to talk about is going to be the Wangho, okay, which is in the Wangho River Valley over there. It's going to begin around 2000 BC in northern China. We have no records of their beginnings. We have no artifacts from the beginning. What we do know comes from legend. So there was a man god by the name of Yu the Great. And according to the legend, Yu the Great is going to drive the serpents and the dragons out from along the river. And then he's going to drain the land so that people could live there. And he's going to unite most of northern China. And he is going to found the beginning of the Xia kingdom. Now, some people think this is just a myth. Some people think that this is actually how it happened. Bottom line is, civilization begins here. The Wangho area is chosen because the floods of this area bring fertile soil to the area. And this river valley is going to be very much cut off from others. So they're going to develop without any influence from anybody else. They're kind of by themselves. Okay, so very isolated river valley. Around 1800 BC, you're going to see some villages and farms all along this river. And this farmland, these villages, these farms are springing up there, and lots of farmland. It's going to be used for river, for trade, for travel. They built these small round houses with thatched roofs. And there would be clay ovens in the villages. And in the house, they'd have clay ovens, and there'd be cupboards and benches and pottery. The very first records of Chinese civilization comes from a dynasty. Now, when I say a dynasty, that's the ruling family. It's going to be in 1766 BC. You're going to have the Shang dynasty, or the Shang ruling family. And they're going to build the first Chinese cities. And most of them will be built the same way. At the center of the city, you're going to have a palace or a temple. And they would have public buildings that surround it. Government officials' homes would surround it. And then further out in the city you go, you'd have workers' homes and workshops and burial grounds and things like that for the cities. And most of these Shang cities will be built the same way. Now, most people, though, they don't live in the city. The city was the home for the rich and the educated and the skilled. The poor lived in the country, and they were farmers. And they grew grains like wheat and millet and rice. They would raise cattle and sheep and chickens. They produced silk hundreds of years before anybody else produced silk. And out of this silk, they would make clothes for the rich. As far as what the civilization believed, the Shang worshipped spirits, these supernatural beings. And they believed that the spirits lived in the mountains and the rivers and the seas. And the people had to please the spirits. Because if you had unhappy spirits, it meant you had poor harvests or you lost battles. And your fortunes were also determined by your ancestors or the people that you descended from. And you would offer them food and wine and prayers. You know, family ties were important because of this respect. You know, there were rules about how you should act toward family members. You know, children had to obey their parents. You had to honor your elders. Wives obeyed their husbands. The kings believed to receive the kings were believed to receive power from spirits and their ancestors. So religion and government were very much tied together. You know, the kings were supposed to make sure the spirits give water to the fields. The kings would ask advice from the ancestors. They would use something called oracle bones. And they would write questions on these polished, flat bones. And they would drill holes in the middle. And they would put a hot bar into the hole. And those bones would crack. And the patterns of the cracks would give the answer. And there was an interpreter that could supposedly read oracle bones. And he would read the answer to the king. This is the oldest form of Chinese writing, coming from these oracle bones. The nobles were the people of high rank in a kingdom. They hold power under the king. And they would hunt a lot for pleasure and to prepare for war. They would fight with each other over land. And they would join together to fight people who went against the Shang. And they rode into battle on horse-drawn bronze chariots, and they wore bronze helmets. They would wear armor made from buffalo or rhinoceros hide. They are very skilled with their bow and arrows. They had sharp points made out of bronze or bone, not just sharpened sticks. The soldiers would march on foot behind the nobles' chariots. The soldiers were usually made up of those poor farmers. The nobles usually forced them to fight their wars for them. As far as the decline of the Shang go, well, one of the big things is there's going to be a huge gap between the rich and the poor. The rich had these wood houses and bronze weapons and silk clothes. The poor lived in thatched or mud huts or even caves. They had wood or stone tools. So there was no loyalty to each other. You know, the poor weren't loyal to their nobles. And this gap between the rich and the poor is really going to weaken the Shang. And in 1122 BC, the Zhou are going to invade. And when they invade, the Shang were not united enough to hold off these invaders. And so that Shang dynasty, that Shang civilization ends. But what the Shang do leave behind are some very fine works of bronze, sculptures and cups and vases and other religious items they do leave behind that we have found.